Hey y'all, back again with another video, and today we are going to be talking about and reviewing the book When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. In the last video, I made predictions of what this book would be about, and then I read the actual blurb. So if you haven't watched that video and you want to know what the book is about without any spoilers, you can go back and check that out. I also covered another book that has several short mystery stories, and it's the best mysteries of 2024. So if you want to know what that book is, you can go back to the last video and also check that out. Like I said, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you don't want spoilers, then maybe don't dive into it. But if you are interested in spoilers, and you're the type of person who kind of doesn't really like to read, but you want to know what a book is about, or if you're the type of person who will still read a book even with all the spoilers, go on ahead and watch this video. Also, real quickly, I'm going to ask you all to please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, make sure you share it. Another quick announcement, like I made in the last video, I'll be shortly coming out with a short mystery story of my own. So keep that in mind and look forward to updates about that. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I will say this book took quite a bit of time. I wouldn't say to get into the story, but it did take a bit of time to, like, I guess, get into like the climax, or not necessarily the climax, but just like what is actually going on in like in the story. I was reading it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like when are we gonna get to something, happening here? And it was within the like last 100 pages or so. And this book is 352 pages long. Like literally from almost from cover to cover. There's like maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 pages that are not book. And so I will say, I wouldn't say it was frustrating, but I was just a little bit eager to get to what was going on. That being said, it's not like there wasn't any clues or stuff, but I'm the type of person who likes the drama, who likes the suspense, the thrill, and I feel like for a large portion of this story, we didn't get too much of that. Okay, so getting into what the story is about. So the story begins off, we have our main character, Sydney, and we have another character, Sydney's best friend, Drea. We have one of the other main characters whose name is Theo, and then we have like various surrounding neighbors. I won't go through necessarily all of their names, but they are important to the story. So we begin with like a prologue where Sydney is on a neighborhood tour of her own neighborhood, and I guess she's just curious to see what the tour is about. And throughout this tour, pretty much the tour guide is only speaking about the white influence in the neighborhood, and this bothers Sydney because this is a black neighborhood. Sydney is black, and there's so much history in the neighborhood that revolves around Black people or Black historical figures, and not one Black person is mentioned on this tour. I think maybe one is, but it was very minor. And so, you know, she is continuously interrupting the tour guide because she's like, oh, what about this person? And what about this person? And the tour guide is getting super annoyed with her. And at one point, there is a guy and a girl who seem to be a girlfriend and boyfriend. And the guy asks Sydney a question about one of the things she mentioned, to which the girlfriend nudges him and is like, stop interrupting the tour. And so at this point, the tour guide gets upset with her and is like, oh, well, maybe you could start your own tour and to cover those things. And it feels like it's kind of like one of those backhanded comments, because clearly I don't think the tour guide thinks that she would be able to do so. So with that, she walks away and she goes into her home to, you know, and she stands up there making sure that all of these people plus the tour guide see that, yes, I do live here. Okay, and so we move into the first chapter of the book, and this is where we find out that Sydney has a mother who is in a nursing home. And throughout the story, she constantly mentions calling her mother, and you know, always like it's always going to voicemail, and she's always just like, oh, I just wanted to hear your voice, blah blah blah. So she always calls her mother. She's always in contact with her mother. She's also dealing with lawyers trying to save her mother's house, as we will find out later on in the story if you do read it. She's trying to save her mother's house. The lawyers, these people are constantly contacting her and bothering her about trying to sell her mom's house, and she's constantly turning them down or telling them, my mom is not here. So her mother also owns a garden in the neighborhood, which she takes care of now since her mother is in the nursing home. So there are various neighbors surrounding Sydney, and one of which I believe in whose name is Wanda. And Wanda suddenly just up and disappeared. And nobody knows why. And Sydney feels a way about it because this is somebody who she knew since she was a child. So she finds it strange that Wanda just up and disappeared. She also begins to notice that that is sort of a pattern going throughout the story, that people are just up and disappearing. And so she also notices that while these Black residents are disappearing, there are several white people who are moving in to their homes. One of which is the girlfriend and the boyfriend who were on the tour. And she constantly mentions that she is able to, because they live across the street from her now, and she's able to see through their house because they don't use curtains, and she's assuming that they can see through her house as well. And she's always watching them, and she makes note that they don't really communicate at all, especially the girlfriend to the boyfriend. And we find out later on that these two people, their names are Theo and Sydney. Now Theo becomes one of the main characters. Another big thing in this story is that there is a new company that took over a hospital in the neighborhood that has been shut down. And this company is called Verentech, and their mission is to rid the opioid crisis in the neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. However, the people in the community don't really like this. It's not exactly clear why, but one can assume through things that they mention that it's because they they feel as though they brought the opioid crisis to the neighborhood, to Black neighborhoods specifically. And when they put who's suffering from opioids, they don't highlight that it's Black people. They put white people. One could assume that this is because they don't want people to see that Black people need help. I found this interesting because I feel like a lot of the times Black people are always the face of negative things that are going on. So I found it interesting that the author chose to do that. And so, but yeah, they feel like, oh, this is just like a face that they're trying to put on. Like they're bringing a company to resolve opioids when they're the ones who brought the issue here, because obviously the people in this company are white people. And so there's, in regards to the hospital, there's also this myth or legend, will you say, that there are mole people underground and the mole people will grab you. And there's also a rumor that some of the people in the neighborhood who disappeared were grabbed by these mole people. And so yeah, so we move on to Drea, who I must have missed exactly what her job was at the beginning of the story, but she works for a company. I don't know if she's a lawyer or something. I think she works with something that has to do with law. And Sydney is constantly asking Drea to look into this company, Verentech. And so Drea has asked a coworker of hers to help her look into this. And so Sydney is always asking her if they've gotten any leads. And this is something they're not necessarily supposed to be doing. So they're trying to keep it on the low, Drea and her coworker. Little background on Drea. Drea is Sydney's best friend. She pretty much was raised by Drea's mother, basically. Also, it seems as though Sydney is a little bit codependent on Drea, always asking Drea for help. Also, more background on Sydney, though it's not necessarily important. Sydney is divorced, and her ex-husband was abusive, but not in the physical way, more so in the verbal way, super demeaning to her. And that's why she moved back to Brooklyn to live with her mother. She now works as an administrative assistant or in administration in a school where she was previously a teacher when she lived with her husband. So we get into the introduction of Theo, because at this point the book starts going back from Theo's point of view to Sydney's point of view. And so we learn a little bit about Theo. We do learn that yes, Theo and Kim are pretty much on the outs. Their relationship is pretty much over. Kim had cheated on him previously with somebody who was rich. And this is when we find out that Theo comes from a very poor background. Kim doesn't really know much about him at all. She doesn't know that he was poor. He met her at a bar when she was trying to just, I guess, relieve her sorrows. But this was something that Theo always did. And so he realized that, oh, she comes from money, when she didn't have a problem paying for things and stuff like that. It's clear that her parents didn't like him or don't like him. It's also clear that she is a little bit resentful to him for not making as much money, not to mention he's not working right now. And Kim believes that it's because he can't find a job, or he's just too lazy, or he's just not good enough. And so moving on, more backstory about Theo, I guess. Even though we find this out later on, we do find out that Theo was sort of a criminal. And the reason he can't find a job is because he actually was embezzling funds from the job that he worked at. And so he's pretty much been red listed, and that's why he cannot find a job. So back to the tour. Remember how the tour guide was like to Sydney, maybe you should start your own tour? Well, Sydney takes this seriously, and she's like, well, I'm going to do my research and all of this, and I am going to start my own tour. I'm going to do my own tour. And so she initially had somebody to help her with the research. However, he just up and disappeared. Nobody knows why. And so at a community meeting, she officially meets Theo after watching him and through his house. And Theo pretty much suggests that he could help her. And this is where their relationship starts. A romantic relationship from there develops. And this is because of Kim. So going back to Kim now, Kim is pretty much racist. Theo seems to be a little bit in denial about that. However, I think he does realize that she has racist tendencies at least. She's not just privileged, but she talks down on the people in the neighborhood. She thinks that the neighborhood is unsafe because she thinks that all the black people are robbers and, thieves and all of that. And she even has a meeting with some of her friends when Theo was out, and he walks in on them. And they're pretty much talking about having a counter celebration to the celebration that the community is having on Labor Day to, I guess, combat whatever it is they want to combat because they're white and these people are black. Also, I will say that although like this whole entire story is pretty much based on the premise of developed from the idea of Sydney starting a tour and working with Theo to do this tour, we never actually see the tour come to fruition by the end of the book. It's not even in the epilogue, and I'll say that annoyed me a little bit. There is something else that also didn't come to fruition or like come to any sort of resolve by the end. If I remember it, I'll come back to it. And so things start getting a little bit more, I guess, suspicious. So Sydney is about to go and do her hair, and it's super hot, and she's like, I can't do this anymore. I can't walk. So she orders an Uber. The Uber cancels, and then another person picks up her ride. She gets into the car, and she notices that he's not going in the proper direction. So she starts to freak out, and she's like, let me out of the car. And he's like, oh, relax, relax, blah, blah, blah. Finally, and when she looks at her phone, she sees that his name is not popping up. All the information for him that picked up the Uber is pretty much just gone. And that's very strange. Even when she gets out of the car, like past orders for an Uber, she only sees the one that canceled. She doesn't see him. Of course, she chalks it up to malfunction, but this is something that has been bothers her throughout the entire story. She always goes back and she looks at it because she's like, what was going on there? And honestly, I think that would creep me out too. And so her and Theo, they are, like I said, they develop a type of romantic relationship. Not at first, but clearly they like each other, and then they get into a relationship of sorts after Kim up and leaves in the middle of the night. And she just never comes back. But she comes back and she breaks up with Theo. But Theo doesn't really care. He's relieved. I guess he just wanted her to do it anyway. He also admits to Sydney at some point that he only really stayed with Kim because he figured he could take advantage of her money and he didn't have any. And that was his initial reason for staying with her. And in this conversation, it is revealed to us that Sydney doesn't actually speak to her mom every day. Sydney's mom isn't actually in a nursing home. Sydney's mom is dead. And they're actually having this conversation after a bunch of cops come and take away her mother's garden because they claim that they didn't obtain it lawfully or legally from the original owner. And so this other person went and bought the deed from the original owner. And so now they have to give up the garden, and they go into the garden and they tear up the garden and everything. And obviously Sydney is super heartbroken over this. And even when like she gets into this argument with a cop or with the person who now owns it, and they're all pretty much laughing in her face, including the cops. And they just let this dude talk to her like that. Of course, these cops and this guy, they're all white. Even when she asks to see the deed, he doesn't want to initially show her. But when he does show her, it looks like it was just like an AI or like a photocopy of something. Like it looks fake, pretty much. And so we know that they're just trying to take over the neighborhood, pretty much. And so we learned that her mother is dead and her mother is actually buried in the garden. And so Theo, while she's sleeping, goes and tries to find her mother's body, but he says that her mother's body is not there. And we never actually even get that resolved either. It's assumed that, you know, the people dug it up and found it, but he says the area wasn't even dug up. And so there was no resolve for that by the end of the book, no finding of her mother's body, no idea or inkling of where her mother's body could even be. I also didn't like that. So there is one night, like earlier on also, where Theo goes out to walk through the neighborhood because he's just had a fight with Kim. Obviously, this is before Kim left or had an argument or whatever. And he's looking at the hospital and he thinks he sees lights in the hospital. So he stops behind the, like, you know, on the other side, looking through the fence to see. And then somebody shoves him up against the gate. And it's a big, tall black guy. And he seems like he's on drugs. Asks for money. Theo says no, and then the guy runs away. The cops come up, ask him, oh, have you seen this dude? Theo points at them in the direction of this guy. Now, there comes a point in the story where Sydney is actually in Theo's house, and this is after, you know, they've been doing some tour stuff and all of that. And also at this point in the story, Sydney has been texting Drea for quite a bit of time, and Drea has not been responding. And she initially believes that it's because Drea is annoyed with her and her codependency. But every time she opens her messages, she sees that Drea is typing, but she's just not sending anything. Actually, to go back a little bit, before she's in Theo's house, she hears somebody entering or coming out of Drea's apartment. And, you know, she goes to Drea's apartment upstairs because Drea lives upstairs from her. And she opens the door because her door is unlocked. And she finds two things. She finds that there's a bunch of bed bugs on Drea's sheet, which is something that she noticed constantly happened throughout the story. Like, people would end up with bed bugs and then they just disappear. That's not explored further. Also, their air conditioner in Drea's apartment has been removed, so it's gone. And so when she is in Theo's apartment now, she recognizes two things. She recognizes that there is an air conditioner, and while she's looking out the window, there's a marking on the air conditioner, which is two hearts, the same exact two hearts in the same place that Drea's air conditioner has. So now, of course, I'm like, oh my gosh, Theo is a part of this all. She looks down to her left. There's an iPad there with messages popping up. And it is of Kim talking to a guy saying, oh, did you kill them? Did you get rid of them? And it's clearly talking about the situation in the neighborhood. It's talking about, did you kill Sydney? And so Theo conveniently walks out and he's on his phone. And so Sydney, of course, is thinking, I got to get out of here, because now it seems apparent that Theo is a part of this. And so when Theo goes back into the kitchen, she sneaks out and with his duffel bag with the iPad, and she goes back to her apartment. Shortly thereafter, she's looking through the window. Theo is looking at her like, what's wrong with you? Why did you leave? And then he calls her because he sees a big guy enter into her apartment. And it looks like earlier in the story, there was someone who came to read her meter, but they didn't have the uniform on, and the van didn't look like a meter reading dude van. And the person only went away because they saw Theo come up. Up until that point, he had been demanding to get into the house. And so it is that same guy who's in her, coming up into her home, and eventually gets into the apartment. So Sydney actually has a way to escape. She goes through a door, a servant's door that's in her house. This is the first time we're hearing about this door, but she goes through this servant's door that's in her house, goes down the stairs, and that's where she finds Drea dead on the floor with a message open saying, I'm sorry, I love you. And Sydney can't cry because this guy is after her. And up until this point, Sydney had also kind of believed that Drea had betrayed her. But she really hadn't. She'd just been dead. At this point, Theo comes in. Sydney has found her mother's revolver, and they pretty much kill the guy. So he's bleeding out. And this is where we get everything escalating now. So they run out into the street. They hear a mob outside. There's cops outside. They're trying to round up people. So I guess this is a climax of them trying to really take over the neighborhood. They meet upon one of their neighbors who tries to get them to come into her house. There's a lot that happens before this, but that's so much to go through. So I won't. If you want to read it, definitely read it. But an older neighbor tries to get them to come into our house, and they're like, no. And so instead they go to the hospital, and they enter through a door that leads them underneath. And this is where now we believe that the mole people myth legend is actually true. They were grabbing through people. And so as they're going through this place, a cop comes and tries to stop them. However, Sydney gets kind of into a tussle with him, but then he starts to fall backwards. Sydney actually tries to save him, but he falls and he snaps his neck. So now he's dead. And then they keep going forward through these underground tunnels. And then they get to an area, and she comes upon two people who have been persistent in the story. Two people who, one has been calling her about helping to save her mother's house, or she's been calling, and they haven't really been doing anything. And the other person is a realtor. And she sees these two people, and immediately she realizes that they were part of it. And pretty much she kills the both of them, because she tries to approach them to find out what is going on, and they're beating around the bush or trying to deny it until they're not, and they try to get slick with her, get smart with her about everything. And so first she kills the realtor guy, and then no, she kills the lady. Sorry, she kills the lady, and then Theo is the one who kills the realtor guy. To which she's like, I was trying to get information out of him, but then she's like, you know what? It's okay. We'll get information another way. And so they keep on, moving along, and then eventually they get to an area where they see a bunch of people locked up behind bars. They look like they're high on drugs. And we find out that they've been testing on people in the neighborhood. Virentech has been testing on people in the neighborhood to find a way to resolve the opioid issue. So they're using black people as test subjects. And apparently this is because the mice can't mimic exactly what they need because they're not human. So they wanted to use humans, and so they decided to use black people. And one of those people happened to be the black guy who Theo ran up on that time when he thought he saw lights at the hospital. Not only is that the guy that Theo met, but he's also the guy that initially disappeared, who was supposed to be helping Sydney do her research for her tour. And so after finding these people, they keep on going, and they come upon a room. And in this room, they see Kim, they see Kim's father, and they see a whole bunch of other white people plus one black person who's involved in politics. And a fight breaks out, and Kim's father is killed first. And Kim says, "Oh, I'm so happy you did that for me," to Theo. Like, now I can be in charge. And she's pretty much threatening to kill them now. But Theo takes his gun and shoots her. So now they're dead, and there's a lot of people who are also dead from them shooting around, and they're also injured. And so when Theo and Sydney are trying to exit the place, when they get out, they see that the blood from their previous shootings has been cleaned up. And then they see two guys approach them, and they are immediately drugged by these two people. And they wake up in a room. They're tied to a bed. However, in a turn of events, as the guy is pretty much like telling Sydney and Theo that they're about to die, he's eating food and he grabs his throat. So clearly there was something in the food. And in walks two black people, which are two people from the neighborhood. And apparently they had drugged the two men, and they saved Sydney and Theo. So I guess they were using these two people to prepare food, or they gotten food from them or something, and they were aware of what was going on, and so they drugged them. And so Sydney is like, "You knew what was going on this entire time?" And they were like, "Yes, we knew. We were trying to solve it the old way, but clearly that wasn't working. And so we're down to try and help solve it a different way." And so they exit the building, and they set the building on fire. And my thing about them setting the building is on fire is that we're not really sure if all those people that were like black people that they were researching on were still in the building, or if they saved them. So that to me was also something that was unresolved. Maybe I missed it, but I was a bit bothered by that as well. And so pretty much we end the story with them reading other community, like people's posts in other community like forums about pretty much the same thing happening in their communities. And so to that, Sydney is like, well, what do we do? And one of her neighbors is like, we can't rush anything. We're just going to take it one step at a time. And the book ends there. And I have to say, it was pretty anticlimactic. I don't think it was a terrible book by any means. I think that Alyssa Cole is an amazing writer in the way she writes. I just feel like I personally was unsatisfied. It said it mirrored kind of like a Get Out, and what was the other one? A Rare Window story. And I could see why, because of the white people and their like super evil deeds, like undercover, and also like that hint that maybe Theo was a part of it, but then he ended up not being a part of it. So I get that that could be seen as the vibe of Get Out, and the other one, which I haven't actually seen. But yeah, I was pretty like unsatisfied with like the couple things I mentioned that went unresolved by the end of the story. And also just the ending being super anticlimactic. I know that means that there's more to be done, obviously, and that could be a reference to just even in today's world with racism and all of these things going on, there's more to be done to take a step in the right direction. But yeah, I think I was a bit unsatisfied with my read, I'll have to say. I did not hate the book. I think I'm going to give this book a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed reading it, oddly enough, despite everything I said. I did enjoy reading it to an extent. It wasn't my favorite read, obviously, but yeah, I feel like more could have been done. I think a lot was explored. I don't think that there was any issues there. I just think that like solving more of the things that she brought up in the story would have been more satisfying, because I think the author was focused on that underlying like premise of racism and opioids and gentrification of communities, that the other little mysteries or little stories that popped up were not resolved. And that happens. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. If you like this video, please like this video. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.